Morning, everybody. We serve an amazing God, don't we? And it is just wonderful to be able to do that together. I know I've said this before, probably multiple times, and some of you might be tired of hearing it. There are some times just in a daily Bible read where there's a phrase that I'm reading, it just jumps off the page at me for whatever reason. Even if it's something I know the story, I've read it I don't know how many times, I've heard it I don't know how many times. But then there's just a phrase that jumps off the page at me and really just gets me thinking. And that's what this morning's lesson is going to be about. The phrase was this: the Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. And so what I want to do is just go to this passage that was in my daily Bible read and go through the context, talk about what was going on there, because I think there's a couple of things that we really need to consider and really need to think about in this text. So if you will, turn to 1 Kings 16, please. 1 Kings 16. And while you're turning to 1 Kings chapter 16, just for some context where we are, we're in the time of the divided kingdom. So after the United Kingdom, after Saul, David, Solomon, the kingdom's been divided into the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. And we're going to focus on the northern kingdom of Israel. They had not one righteous king. Not one king that followed after God's heart, not one king that was righteous and followed God's ways. And specifically, we're going to focus on the seventh king of Israel. His name is Ahab. And we're going to get a summary of the type of ruler that Ahab was in 1 Kings 16. So if you're in 1 Kings 16, look with me, please, down at verse 29. 1 Kings 16, look down at verse 29, please. Now Ahab, the son of Omri, became king over Israel in the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah. And Ahab, the son of Omri, reigned over Israel in Samaria 22 years. Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord more than all who were before him. It came about as though it had been a trivial thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, that he married Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and went to serve Baal and worshipped him. So he erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he built in Samaria. Ahab also made the Asherah. Thus Ahab did more to provoke the Lord God of Israel than all the kings of Israel who were before him. So Ahab was evil, and this summary of Ahab's reign and what he was about, he did more evil than all of the sins of the rulers before him in Israel. And remember, they had not one righteous king, not one good king. Ahab was it was rough. It says that Ahab made the sins of the first king, Jeroboam, he made those sins look trivial compared to the sins that he committed. He marries this wicked and evil woman, Jezebel of the Sidonians. You remember Tyre and Sidon last week? Long history of spiritual uncleanness, spiritual filth of the Sidonians. And Ahab builds temples for these false gods, Baal and the false female gods called the Asherah, and he provoked the Lord to anger more than all the kings before him. I don't think we can overemphasize that at this point. More than all the kings of Israel before him. Look at chapter 17, verse 1 with me, please. Because of all of this sin, this evil that Ahab is pushing in Israel, chapter 17, verse 1, it's time for God to bring the punishment. Look at chapter 17, verse 1. Now Elijah the Tishbite, who was of the settlers of Gilead, said to Ahab, as the Lord the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, surely there shall be neither dew nor rain these years, except by my word. So here we see the first mention of Elijah the prophet, and God sends this prophet to tell Ahab, because of their unfaithfulness to God, there would be no dew, there would be no rain until God willed for it to happen. There would be a drought. And in the rest of chapter 17, Elijah's told by God to go hide, get away from Elijah. He's going to try to come after you. Go hide. God provides for him. He gives him food. He gives him water, even during this drought. And God even provides for Gentiles by Elijah during this massive drought that's going on. And that brings us to 1 Kings 18. This is where we're going to spend all of our time this morning, is in 1 Kings 18. And I want to read the first 16 verses of chapter 18. We're not going to discuss everything that's in these first 16 verses, but it's really going to set us up well for the main focus of today's lesson. So let's read the first 16 verses here. Chapter 18. Now it happened after many days that the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the third year, saying, go show yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the face of the earth. So Elijah went to show himself to Ahab. Now the famine was severe in Samaria, Ahab called Obadiah, who was over the household. Now Obadiah feared the Lord greatly, for when Jezebel destroyed the prophets of the Lord, Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them by fifties in a cave and provided them with bread and water. Then Ahab said to Obadiah, "Go through the land to all the springs of water, to all the valleys. Perhaps we'll find grass and keep the horses and mules alive and not have to kill some of the cattle." So they divided the land between them to survey it. Ahab went one way by himself, and Obadiah went another way by himself. Now, as Obadiah was on the way, behold, Elijah met him, and he recognized him and fell on his face and said, "Is this you, Elijah, my master?" He said to him, "It is I. Go say to your master, behold, Elijah is here." He said, "What sin have I committed that you're giving your servant into the hand of Ahab to put me to death? As the Lord your God lives, there is no nation or kingdom where my master has not sent to search for you." And when they said, "He's not here," he made the kingdom or nation swear that they could not find you. And now you're saying, "Go say to my master, behold, Elijah is here." It will come about when I leave you that the Spirit of the Lord will carry you where I don't know. So when I come and tell Ahab that, and he can't find you, he will kill me, although I, your servant, have feared the Lord from my youth. Has it not been told to my master what I did when Jezebel killed the prophets of the Lord, that I hid 100 prophets of the Lord by fifties in a cave and provided them with bread and water? And now you're saying, "Go say to your master, behold, Elijah is here." He will then kill me. Elijah said, "As the Lord of hosts lives, before whom I stand, I will surely show myself to him today." So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. So here in these just first two verses of this chapter, that while God was providing for Elijah, while God was providing even for Gentiles through Elijah in chapter 17, this drought has been going on for 3 years. And we know it was severe. This drought causes a famine, and it says the famine was severe in Samaria in verse 2. Jesus over in Luke chapter 4 and James over in James chapter 5, they say that this lasted 3 years and 6 months. So 3.5 years with no dew, no rain, and the famine was severe in Samaria. I mean, this is a serious drought. And Elijah is told by God, "Go to Ahab," verse 1, "because I'm going to send rain." And we get another detail about just how awful that Ahab's wife Jezebel is, because she was killing prophets of the one true God in verse 4. Did you see that in verse 4? And thankfully, Obadiah was here. He was able to protect 100 of them. And remember, this is a severe drought, severe famine. He hides these prophets of the Lord in caves and provides them with bread and water in a drought. So this would have been very costly for Obadiah to do, a big sacrifice, but Obadiah does this. But also notice where Ahab's priorities are during this 3.5 year drought where the famine is severe. What is he looking for? He's looking for grass, but what's the purpose? He's looking grass so that they can keep the horses, the mules, and the cattle alive. Don't you think if he were a really good king, he'd be worried about his people maybe during a really severe drought, a really severe famine? But some people have suggested, especially because horses are specifically mentioned here, that he's worried about his military might. And then on top of that, the cattle, maybe he's worried about his own food sources. So Ahab is only thinking about himself during this severe drought, severe famine. But Elijah has been sent by God to go tell Ahab that rain is on the way. And so Elijah has this interaction with Obadiah. I'd love to talk more about that, but maybe we'll save that for another day. And so Elijah is going to meet up with Ahab in verse 16. So let's keep reading and let's see the interaction between Elijah and Ahab. Let's look at verse 17, please. When Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, "Is this you, you troubler of Israel?" He said, "I have not troubled Israel, but you and your father's house have, because you've forsaken the commandments of the Lord and you have followed the Baals. Now then, send and gather to me all Israel at Mount Carmel, together with 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of the Asherah, who eat at Jezebel's table." So Ahab, upon immediately seeing Elijah, he calls him the troubler of Israel. Your version might say, "Is it you, the one ruining Israel?" I kind of like that. He's like, "You're the one ruining Israel." And the implication is that back in chapter 17, verse 1, Elijah's the one who said, "No dew, no rain until God wills it." So he's saying, okay, it's Elijah's fault that there's no rain. There's a severe drought, severe famine. This is Elijah's fault. You're ruining Israel. And Elijah comes back at him and he says, it's not me who's ruining Israel. It's you. and it's your household, it's your family, because you've forsaken the commandments of the Lord and you're following after these false gods. What I love about this is I think it shows the priorities of these two men as well. Where Ahab is so concerned about this physical drought that's ravaging the land, he thinks that's the problem with Israel, is this physical drought. Elijah points out the much deeper issue. It's not the physical drought, it's the drought of faithfulness to the Lord. That's the more serious one, and that's the drought that caused this physical drought. And so Elijah says, I'm not ruining Israel. It's you and it's your household because you are following after these Baals. Well, Elijah issues a challenge in verse 19. He says, gather all Israel to me at Mount Carmel. And he says, also gather the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of the Asherah. Now that's going to be interesting, I think, as we keep reading. There were 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of the Asherah. It's going to be really important. So hold on to that for just a minute. So 850 prophets. He's saying, bring them to me at Mount Carmel, and something's going to happen here at Mount Carmel. But also we see another detail about how wicked and evil Jezebel is. Because notice what it says about the false prophets of Baal and the false prophets of the Asherah in verse 19. They eat at Jezebel's table. They are being sponsored and supported by the queen over Israel. The wickedness, this drought of faith to Yahweh, the real God, is being pushed from the top down, from the royalty. The false prophets eat at her table. I mean, it's awful. It's being pushed by them. But this challenge has been issued. Bring them to Mount Carmel. And so let's keep reading and see what happens next. Look at verse 20, please. Verse 20. So Ahab sent a message among all the sons of Israel and brought the prophets together at Mount Carmel. Elijah came near to all the people and said, how long will you hesitate between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, follow him. But the people did not answer him a word. Then Elijah said to the people, I alone am left a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Now let them give us 2 oxen, and let them choose 1 ox themselves and cut it up and place it on the wood, but put no fire under it. I will prepare the other ox and lay it on the wood, and I will not put a fire under it. Then you call in the name of your God, and I'll call in the name of the Lord, and the God who answers by fire, he is God. And the people said, that is a good idea. So here we see the people, likely not all the people of Israel, but likely representatives of Israel, come up to Mount Carmel along with the 450 prophets of Baal. Now what's fascinating to me is, where are the 400 false prophets of the Asherah? I don't know. I don't think we're going to see them throughout the rest of the chapter either. So I don't know if they just didn't answer the call, or if maybe this challenge was directly about Baal. I don't know, but I don't think we're going to read about them again, which is interesting. I don't know. But here in this these verses here in verse 21, Elijah says, how long are you going to waver between two opinions? It seems like they were sort of trying to serve the one true God and trying to serve these false gods at the same time. And Elijah's telling them, you can't do that. If you know anything about Yahweh, if you know anything about the one true God, you can't serve both. So if the Lord is God, follow him. If Baal is God, then follow him. And so he sets forth this challenge. But before he even sets forth the challenge, I don't know what to make of this. Maybe you can think about this and tell me what you think about it. But at the end of verse 21, when Elijah says, how long are you going to ride the fence and not choose a side? If Yahweh's God, follow him. And if Baal's God, then follow him. Notice at the end of verse 21, the people didn't answer him a word. I really don't know what to make of that. I don't know what this says about them, but they didn't answer him. They didn't have an answer for him at this point. So then he says, okay, so here's what we're going to do. I alone am left a prophet and of the Lord. And here's these 450 false prophets of Baal here. So let's have a competition. Let's have a contest here and see what's going to happen. He says, you pick an ox for yourselves, prepare it, put it on the altar, but don't light it. I'm going to do the same thing. And we're both going to call on our gods. Whichever one answers with fire, that one's God. And what's fascinating here to me is at the end of verse 24, this is when the people speak up. And they say, that's a good idea, or that sounds good. Yeah, let's do it. Let's see a demonstration. And I love that lead in to what's going to happen next. But yeah, let's see a demonstration. They wouldn't say a word when he told them, you need to choose which God you're going to serve. Stop wavering between two opinions. But then Elijah suggests, okay, let's have a demonstration. Let's see who's God. And they say, well, that's a good idea. Okay, I don't know what that says about them either, but let's keep reading and see what happens next here. Look at verse 20, please. Or I'm sorry, we already read that. Verse 25. Verse 25. So Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose one ox for yourselves and prepare it first, for you are many, and call in the name of your God, but put no fire under it. Then they took the ox which was given them, and they prepared it, and called on the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, "O Baal, hear us, answer us." But there was no voice, and no one answered. And they leaped around the altar which they made. And it came about at noon that Elijah mocked them and said, "Call out with a loud voice, for he's a god. Either he's occupied, or he's gone inside, or maybe he's on a journey. Perhaps he's asleep and needs to be awakened." So they cried out with a loud voice and cut themselves, according to their custom, with swords and lances, until the blood gushed out on them. When midday was past, they raved until the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, but there was no voice, no one answered, and no one paid attention. So first up, Elijah says, "Okay, you've got a lot more prophets than me. You're many, so you go first." And Elijah lets them pick their own ox. I think that's important here too. There can be no accusation of fraud or, I don't know, I can't think of another way to say that. There's no accusation of fraud or cheating here. They picked their own ox. And so he lets them do that, and they start calling out on the name of Baal from morning until noon. "Oh, Baal, answer us." But we see here in verse 26, there was no voice and no one answered. So then they start to heighten things, okay? Then they leap around the altar. Your version might say they danced around it, or they limped around the altar. So that they're ramping these things up for hours. They're calling out to Baal for hours, and they're leaping or dancing or limping around this altar. They are giving it all they've got. They're giving a full showing here. And at noon, verse 27, Elijah begins to mock them. And these are not just spur of the moment, I'm just going to say these mean things all of a sudden. What's fascinating to me is we have inscriptions about what people believed Baal to be the god of. And let me just read some of these descriptions to you. He was considered to be a sun god who rode on thunderclouds and sent lightning. So before we even go any further, there's a drought. There's been no dew. There's been no rain. And Baal is thought to ride on thunderclouds and send lightning. Sounds like he's the one who would bring a storm if he could bring the storm. But also we have some inscriptions that detail Baal was thought to have periods of profound meditation. He would fall asleep sometimes, and he would go away on long journeys sometimes. And so Elijah is using the very characteristics of this false god as the very reasons why he's not answering them. It's not just a subtle, "Oh, maybe he actually is on a journey." It's, "This is what you believe about this God. Well, maybe that's why he's not answering you." It's really pretty funny when you think about it. I mean, it really would be a jab in their side. As funny as it is for me to read this, I'm sure it was not funny for these false prophets of Baal, because what do they do next after Elijah starts mocking them? Look at verse 28 again. They're shouting out with a loud voice even more. They're cutting themselves according to their custom until the blood was gushing out of them. I mean, that's pretty grotesque, is it not? Do you think they believe that what they're doing is going to work? I think they think that. They're screaming, they're shouting out to Baal, they're leaping or limping or dancing around this altar, they're cutting themselves so that blood gushes out of them. These self-inflicted wounds were viewed to sort of arouse the sympathies of these gods. "Oh, look, they need help. I'll go help them." Or maybe just get the false god's attention. But look with me at this again. When midday was past, so they're still doing this for hours. They're calling out for hours, and they raved. Your version might say they ranted and raved, or they prophesied frantically until the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice. But the end of verse 29, there was no voice, no one answered, no one paid attention. There was a deafening silence from this God that they were calling out to. That's huge. I mean, that is so huge here. And so I think what we need to notice about this too, with them mutilating themselves, trying to reach out to their God and make their God notice them, in Leviticus 19 and Deuteronomy 14, Yahweh explicitly forbids it. He explicitly says, "You are not going to serve me in that way. You are not going to do that." And I think it shows just how far gone these people were in serving their false gods. But again, no one answered. There was no voice. Not one person paid attention. Okay, so Baal's turn has come and gone. That altar is dry. No fire. That offering is still sitting there. No fire. Really important. So let's look at the next player in this contest, and let's see what happens here. Look at verse 30, please. Verse 30. Elijah said to all the people, "Come near to me." So all the people came near to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down. Elijah took 12 stones, according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, Israel shall be your name. So with the stones, he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he made a trench around the altar, large enough to hold 2 measures of seed. When he arranged the wood and cut the ox in pieces and laid it on the wood, he said, fill 4 pitchers, your version might say large jars or water pots, with water, and pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood. And he said, do it a second time. And they did it a second time. And he said, do it a third time. And they did it a third time. The water flowed around the altar, and he also filled the trench with water. At the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, Elijah the prophet came near and said, O Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, today let it be known that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and I have done all these things at your word. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back again. Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering and the wood and the stones and the dust and licked up the water that was in the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and they said, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. Then Elijah said to them, seize the prophets of Baal. Do not let one of them escape. So they seized them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon and slew them there. Okay, so here's the next player in this competition. Elijah gathers the people to himself. And in verse 30, it seems that Mount Carmel may have been a high place for both sides of this competition, if you want to call it that. Because if you notice in verse 30, there was an altar to the Lord, to Yahweh, that was there in the past that had been torn down. And so here's Elijah taking this torn down, disheveled altar. He repairs it. He takes 12 stones to picture the 12 tribes of Israel. And this is so significant because we're in the time of the divided kingdom. The northern kingdom of Israel had 10 tribes, and the southern kingdom had 2 tribes. He's in Israel talking to Israelites, and he is really specific to use 12 stones. It's almost like he's saying God is not just God over Israel, he's God over all of it. So don't get it twisted. He's still God over all of it, even if these kingdoms are divided. Verse 32, he digs a trench around the altar big enough to store 2 measures of seed. There's argument about exactly how much this is. Your translation might say 4 gallons. Whatever it is, there's a trench around this altar. And he arranged the wood, he prepares the ox, he laid it on the wood, and he says to have 4 large jars or 4 large pitchers or 4 water pots to pour water on the altar. Now, I remembered this story before. Like I've heard this before. I've read this before. I remembered that water was poured out on this altar, but I don't think it has ever occurred to me that each time it was 4 large water pots. So we're talking 3 times 4 large water pots were poured on this altar. So you're talking about 12 large jars of water have been poured on the offering, the wood, the altar, and it's filling up the trench. Remember what they're in right now. This is a drought. This is a severe famine that's being caused by this drought. Water would have been a precious commodity in this time, right? And here's Elijah. If you're one of these people of Israel who obviously you're wavering between 2 opinions, and you see 12 large water pots being poured out on this altar, I don't know if they would be thinking this, but in a time of drought, I might be saying, why is all this water going to waste? Like, what's going on here? Why is all this water going to waste? It would have been a sacrifice for them. It would have been something they're giving up. But Elijah is making a point. He wants them to see this. It's not really for himself. It's for them to see what's going to happen. I mean, if you try to light that thing that has just been doused and drenched in water, there's just no way it's happening. I'm sure many of us have had like a little ferro rod and, you start a fire that way. That's hard enough when things are dry. There's just no way you're going to light this thing. There's not a chance in the world this is going to catch on fire if it's by the things of men here. Okay. And then at the time of the evening sacrifice, Elijah the prophet came near, verse 36, and he calls on God how many times? 1 time. Think about those false prophets of Baal. They were shouting out for hours and hours. They were leaping and limping and dancing around the altar for hours. They were cutting themselves and gashing themselves till blood rushed out of them. And Elijah calls on Yahweh 1 time. He says, O Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, today let it be known that you are God in Israel. I'm your servant, that I've done all these things at your word. Answer me, O Yahweh, answer me, that this people may know, that they may know that you, Yahweh, are God, and you've turned their hearts back again. So all of this display is for them. It's not really for Elijah. He already knows what's about to happen. It's for them. Let them know that you are God. And so after calling on God one time, how long do you think this calling out to God would have lasted? A minute? 2 minutes maybe? I don't know how slow he talked or how fast he talked, but not very long. And verse 38, the Lord's fire fell. And not only does it just, meagerly catch the offering on fire. That would be impressive enough, right? If just the offering and the wood caught on fire, but that's not all that happens. The Lord's fire falls, verse 38, it consumes the offering, the wood, the stones, the dust on the ground, and takes all of the water out of that trench. That is amazing. If we saw this happen, I would have the exact same reaction as these people in verse 39, where the title of this lesson comes from. The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. It's undeniable. In this contest, the Lord has shown himself to be God, and the people show him some reverence for this. And in verse 40, Elijah says, seize those prophets of Baal, those false prophets, and he takes them down to the brook Kishon and slays them there. Kills them, eradicates the evil from the land. Some people might look at that and say, well, that's kind of harsh, don't you think? Well, not really, because in the law, in Deuteronomy 13 and Deuteronomy 17, God was explicit. If people are pushing gods other than me, if they are causing you to go astray, you eradicate that evil from amongst me. It's an amazing event. Yahweh proves he is the one true God. Some of the evil from Israel is purged. Well, let's finish out this chapter because there's a little bit more left to this story. Look at verse 41, please. Verse 41. Elijah then said to Ahab, go up, eat and drink, for there is the sound of the roar of a heavy shower. So Ahab went up to eat and drink. But Elijah went up to the top of Carmel, and he crouched down on the earth and put his face between his knees. He said to his servant, go up now, look toward the sea. So he went up and looked and said, there is nothing. And he said, go back 7 times. It came about at the 7th time that he said, behold, a cloud as small as a man's hand is coming up from the sea. And he said, go up, say to Ahab, prepare your chariot and go down, so that the heavy shower does not stop you. In a little while, the sky grew black with clouds and wind, and there was a heavy shower. And Ahab rode and went to Jezreel. Then the hand of the Lord was on Elijah, and he girded up his loins and outran Ahab to Jezreel. So after this unbelievable display that the Lord has done on this altar, and he slays those false prophets, Elijah talks to Ahab. Do you think that Ahab would have a little bit more respect when he talks to Elijah after this demonstration? I would think so. I would hope so. And he says, go up, eat and drink. There's the sound of the roar of a heavy shower. I think it's sort of like us if we were to say, tut, tut, looks like rain. That's what he's saying. And there's nothing yet. There's nothing yet. And so Ahab goes up to eat and drink, but Elijah went up to the top of Mount Carmel. He crouches down on the earth. He put his face between his knees. The posture he's praying here, the posture here is not, look at me, look how great I am, look what I just did. 450 verses 1, yeah, that's right. Look at me, guys. He crouches down, puts his head to his knees. It is a posture of humility and even mourning. It's an amazing thing that Elijah does here. He tells his servant, go up and look toward the sea 7 times. The 7th time, there's a little cloud the size of a man's hand that's coming. And he tells his servant, go tell Ahab, get in your chariot, because there's this heavy shower. You don't want that heavy shower to overtake you. And in verse 45, a very little while, the sky grows black with clouds and wind, and there was a heavy, heavy shower. The drought is over. Just like God told Elijah was going to happen, the drought is over. And Ahab rode in his chariot and went to Jezreel. And verse 46 is just so fascinating to me. The hand of the Lord was on Elijah. He girded up his loins, and he outran Ahab to Jezebel. Ahab's in a chariot. But by the power of the Lord, Elijah outruns Ahab in his chariot to Jezreel, which is 27 kilometers away, about 17 miles, over half a marathon. But by the power of the Lord, he outruns this chariot. It's fascinating. It's amazing. It's nothing new in this chapter, though. God's power is on full display in this chapter, and he ends the drought here in Israel. He's demonstrated he's the one true God, purges some evil from the land, and brings this drought to an end. Pretty good, huh? It's pretty awesome, right? Well, this has long been one of my favorite passages from the Old Testament. And there are so many different things that we could talk about from this. We're definitely going to come back to this someday and do completely different topics from what we're going to talk about today. But there's just a couple of things I want to point out today that are really important for us from this chapter. And the first one is this: having a genuine conviction about something. Being completely sincere in your beliefs does not mean that those things are true. Having genuine conviction about something, being absolutely sincere in what you believe, does not make it true. We see that with these false prophets of Baal. Is anybody here questioning that they really believed Baal was going to answer them? They really thought that they're ranting and raving, they're leaping around the altar, the cutting themselves and blood gushing out would get Baal to answer them. I think they were absolutely genuine in what they believed. They were absolutely sincere that Baal was going to answer them. And in all of their genuine conviction, they were genuinely wrong. They were genuinely wrong, and it was to their end. If anything, though, their commitment and devotion was commendable. Can we say that? Can I say that? They were so committed to Baal. They were letting blood gush out of it. I've never done that once for my God. God forbids it. But if he did, I mean, I don't know. It's kind of icky. But they were completely devoted to this, but they were still wrong. Baal is not a god, let alone the God. And I think this is a common question that we all have or have encountered before. We all know people that we love who are wonderful people who probably are genuinely convinced of whatever it is that they believe. And especially when we're talking about religious things, we all know wonderful people who we would say are genuinely wrong about what they genuinely believe. Now, don't shoot the messenger over this, but just like we see here in 1 Kings 18, God reveals that just because we are genuine in our convictions or sincerely believe what we believe, that does not mean that we're right. And so the importance of this for us is we need to realize that we can be wrong. You know, we look nice today, we're in the building, we're doing the things that we do, but we can genuinely believe what we believe and be completely wrong about it. And so it's so important for us, we've got to get in the book. And we got to make sure that everything that we do, we are finding the rationale for it here and not from any other source. We need to constantly be studying the scriptures. Just because we believe something is true and we are fully convinced, completely devoted, that does not mean that it's true. And the false prophets of Baal show us that. But just to add to that, on top of this idea, just because leadership or just because customs that have been passed down say that something is true, that does not mean that it's true. And from this chapter, we see King Ahab, we see Queen Jezebel. They were pushing this idolatry on the people more than all the kings before them. And that's really saying something. Because at the very beginning of the northern kingdom of Israel, Jeroboam set up those two false gods. They set them up and led the people astray. It says it over and over again as we read about the kings. Jeroboam led them astray, but Ahab did more than all those kings before him. So this idolatry and the evil in Israel was being pushed top down. Leadership was pushing this stuff forward. I mean, those 850 false prophets of Baal and then of the Asherah were eating at Jezebel's table. They were eating at the queen's table. It was top down, coming from leadership, but it still wasn't right. No matter what the leadership was pushing, it still wasn't right. Also, in verse 28, this was fascinating to me too. In verse 28, where they're crying out with a loud voice, they're cutting themselves. Look what it says. They were cutting themselves according to their custom. According to their custom. That tells me there were at least some sort of customs or traditions or ways to serve and follow and worship Baal that had been passed down that they were following. I don't know how many years back it had gone. Baal worship wasn't new at this point. But whatever this custom is, this tradition they were following, just because it had been passed down, maybe for generations, it still wasn't right. So just because leadership pushes something, just because it's a tradition or a custom that's been passed down, that does not mean that it's true. And so for us today, just because a national leader says something is true, that doesn't mean that it is. But even a leader in a congregation, just because a leader in a congregation says something is true, that does not mean that it is inherently true. And again, the message is the same. We've got to be constantly getting in the book and be checking and double checking and triple checking. Check the preacher, please. Double, triple, quadruple check. Make sure that what we're doing is from God's inspired word. On top of just leadership or people who speak from the pulpit, we move the pulpit away and it doesn't mean much, right? No, that's a total joke. But top of that, talking about customs that the false prophets of Baal had. How many traditions or customs do we have that we follow because I don't know, it's just kind of the way that we do it. I'm sure we have good reasons for a lot of the things that we do, but how many of the things that we do we do just because that's how we do it? You know, that's the tradition. That's the custom that's been passed down when maybe we could do it a little bit different and it'd still be just as fine. And so the message is still the same here. Just because a leader or just because a tradition or a custom that has been passed down is what's been done for a while, that does not necessarily mean that it's true. And so the message is the same. We've got to get in the book and see what God's inspired word says about it and make sure that that's where we are getting our intel. Okay. One more point from this chapter of the many things. I'm telling you, I can't wait to come back to this someday. But of the many things that we could talk about this, the most important thing from this entire chapter is this: Yahweh, he is God. When you see the Lord in all caps in your Bibles, that is Yahweh. That is his name. Yahweh, he is God. And I'm putting it this way on purpose. The Lord, Yahweh God, proved himself to be God. In this chapter, he puts Baal to shame. He shows a couple of things that I think are really important for us as we're talking to other people. Not all religions lead to the same destination. The Lord proved that. Not all religions lead to the same destination, and not all paths lead to the same place. That's something that's being pushed in our society a lot. Well, they're all kind of the same thing. They all kind of lead to the same place. Yahweh explicitly shows that to be not true. Explicitly shows that. Yahweh is God. And Elijah points out that it seems like those people were sort of riding the fence and trying to say, well, Baal's God and maybe Yahweh's God. We'll just do a little bit of everything and then we'll be fine. But Elijah told them, you can't waver between two opinions. If Yahweh's God, follow him. If Baal's God, follow him. And if you know anything about Yahweh, it is impossible to follow Baal as well. There was this physical drought during that day, but more importantly, there was a drought of faith in Israel. There was a drought of faith to the Lord. And for us today, I just want to turn this to us. There might be a drought of faith in your life today. There might be a drought where maybe you are wavering between two opinions. Maybe you're sort of serving the Lord Yahweh and maybe sort of serve something else. Whether that's just serving yourself, doing the things that you want to do, or maybe it's serving some false god. We probably wouldn't call it a false god, but we very well could. Or are we going to serve and follow Yahweh? Let me just implore you really quickly to consider the implications of this passage that we read this morning. And to add things for us to consider from this is that in the New Testament, Jesus claims to be Yahweh. That's really important for us to see. Jesus claims to be Yahweh, and it had a huge impact on those who heard us during the Lord's Supper talk. It was just brought out for us that when Jesus says, you'll see the Son of Man coming on the clouds and at the right hand of the power, they wanted to kill him for blasphemy. They knew what he was claiming to be. And to add it all together, put it all together, we today are not saved by how sincere we are. We are not saved by how genuine our convictions are. We're not saved by following leadership. We're not saved by following traditions that have been passed on for generations and generations. We are saved through grace, through Jesus, and only through Jesus. Jesus said he is the only way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through him. It's so important for us as we look at 1 Kings 18. Jesus is not a way to salvation. Jesus is the only way to salvation. Yahweh, he is God. Jesus, he is God. And so as we close this morning, if you want to study the scriptures about Yahweh, about Jesus and how he is God and how he is the only way to salvation, we would love to study with you. Or maybe you have studied and you haven't committed your life to him by getting in the water and having your sins forgiven and joining his family. We've got water and we'd love to do it. Or maybe you've been in the water before, but there's been a drought of faith in your life. And if you want to make it right this morning, whatever your spiritual need is, let it be known while together we stand and sing.